My husband's ex-wife won't return the car he paid for, so he steals it right in front of her face. Backstory: before I met my now husband, he was married and divorced. We'll call his ex-wife D. Theirs was not a marriage of love, but a marriage of financial benefit. He was 19, she was a little older. He was in college, but she couldn't afford to go. He was able to get grants and some small bonuses to afford college because his parents were dead broke. Her estranged father made too much money to qualify. So they got married, so the powers that be would no longer consider her parents' income into the ability to pay part of the application for grants. He worked in commercial real estate and went to school part-time. With his income and both their grants and loans, she was able to go to school full-time, and they graduated at the same time. They stayed together through and a little bit after college. Although they didn't really love each other, they did like each other. He started making a decent living and learned to appreciate the finer things in life, and his upwardly mobile career allowed them to buy and sell their first house and then buy a second, nicer home. He also leased them both brand new cars. In 2000, my husband started to feel like their time together had passed its prime, and his wife agreed. They started the divorce process. And since her job didn't pay that much, and they sold the house for a loss during the divorce process, so no one got that, he decided to give her all the furnishings in their home, which were paid for by him, half of his not inconsequential savings and retirement accounts, 100% funded by him. She always spent any money she had left after bills on shoes and clothes, never opened or contributed to a savings account, and an agreement to finish out the remaining months on her very nice SUV's lease. These were in his name and at more than $500 per month. Remember this for later. Basically, my husband was very generous, considering our state would not have required he pay any alimony and only a split of commingled assets, and he'd come into the marriage with a small sum of savings he'd never commingled that he could have kept under law. They used a divorce-in-the-box type of place that does non-contested divorces on the cheap. They were amicably divorced 90 days later and both dating their future spouses within a few months of that. My husband and I started dating in early 2001. 2 to 3 months after the divorce was finalized. A year and a half after the divorce, I moved in with my husband and she married her extremely financially well-off boyfriend. Her screw-up came a few months later. My husband really wanted to make an upward change, different positions in the same industry, which would significantly lower his income for a short time, to $0 for at least 4 months and then a slow but gradual increase, resulting in significantly more income after about a year of ramp-up. My income could just barely cover all of our bills, my soon-to-be car payment, my car was on its last legs and I desperately needed a new car, and his car payment. But I didn't have enough to cover his ex-wife's $500 a month car payment. He decided that since Dee was remarried, he shouldn't have to continue paying for it and should be able to take the car back, and I could drive that instead of buying a new one myself. His car payments were, if included in the divorce decree and not as a separate agreement attached and referenced in the decree, considered alimony in our state, regardless if it's called by the name alimony in the decree or not, and as such can be altered if the supported spouse remarries or either party has a significant change in income. In this case, later she remarried and her marital income more than tripled, and my husband's income became zero for an at the time unknown period of time. So he thought it was fair, and he read his divorce decree and felt it was possible. We consulted a lawyer who agreed that asking for it back was fair, and although it wasn't written into the divorce decree as alimony, it would likely be treated as such if they ended up going to court, so my husband had a good chance of winning. My husband called Dee to explain the situation. He asked for the SUV back, but she said no and ended the conversation. He called her a week later and asked again, stating that if she still refuses, he'll take her to court. She said she'd spoken to her husband and they weren't going to give the car back. As an alternative, my husband asked if they could take over paying all or at least some of the car payment, as the $500 a month would negatively impact his career advancement. They said they spoke to their lawyer and refused to pay a penny on the payment. Okay, on to the next option, court. Our lawyer had laid out a plan for doing it without representation, so he went to the courthouse the next day and filed his complaint. A few days later, Dee calls and says she's been summoned by the court, and she and her husband wanted to come over and see if they could work something out without going to court. Great! We figured that she had seen that those $500 car payments were basically alimony, and she can't really have her ex-husband paying for her car now that she's remarried. But we should have known better than that. The night she and her husband came over, their solution was not to give the car back. No. Their solution was he turn in the $500 per month vehicle, pay the early lease termination penalty, and get her a new 36-month lease on a different, cheaper car. Say, a $250 per month one. Considering there were only 18 months left on the $500 a month lease, this option would actually cost him more money in the long run without the penalty. So that was a big no from us. Dee said, "Well, I talked to my lawyer and he doesn't think you have a snowball's chance in heck of winning in court." My husband said, "Okay, have a good night, bye." And out they went, feeling like they won. Also, while I was writing, my husband just reminded me that we made a third attempt at a compromise. We asked that they take over the payment until the time at which his income returned to the pre-divorce level, by agreeing to share his pay stubs on a monthly basis to verify he was still below the threshold. Once he was back to earning what was at the end of their marriage, he'd take over the payments again. They refused that option too. So here came our revenge. The court date came and my husband showed up to court. Dee? Nowhere to be seen. His case gets called and still no Dee. The judge reads the complaint, listens to the husband's story, and makes his judgment. Paraphrasing, "I don't think my ruling would be any different had she showed up to court, but we'll never know. I hereby declare a default judgment in favor of the plaintiff." Once my husband received a printed copy of the judgment, he hatched his plan. He called Dee, told her he won the case, and asked her for the keys. She said no and hung up on him, so he went to the dealership to order 2 new keys. He had the VIN and the car was his, so no problem there. The third step was that he knew where she worked and her schedule. He ordered a tow truck and requested a sheriff's officer at 3:45 for the next afternoon at her work. So we come to D-Day. 3:45 the next day, 15 minutes before Dee would finish work, he met up with a tow driver and the officer in the parking lot of her work. The officer verified the documents, and they located and loaded the truck onto the flatbed. They moved the truck to the curb right outside the door to Dee's work. A little after 4 o'clock, Dee walks out, sees the trio and her car on the truck, and freezes in her tracks. This is the paraphrased conversation that follows. But you can't do that." My husband hands her the judgment, and the officer reiterates the court's judgment. But I talked to Joe. He said you didn't have a snowball's chance in heck of winning. Those were Joe's exact words. Snowball's chance in heck. Her voice was slightly cracking. My husband thinks for a second to try and figure out who Joe was. She said it like he knew who Joe was. He tried to figure out a lawyer they both knew named Joe, but he could only think of their mortgage broker, Joe. Wait, you mean Joe? Like our mortgage broker, Joe? Your lawyer is a mortgage broker. Yeah, he said that it wasn't written into the divorce decree as alimony, so you couldn't take it just because I got remarried. Well, the judge may or may not have agreed with you and Joe, but since you never showed up to court, you lost your opportunity to find out. She was left open-mouthed, catching flies. He shook the officer's hand, thanked him for his time, said to the truck driver, "I'll meet you back at my house," said goodbye to Dee, and walked away. Just when my husband neared his car, she screamed, "How am I supposed to get home?" And he replied, "Call that pansy of a man you call a husband that was okay with his wife's ex-husband supporting her." They got back to the house, unloaded the tow truck, and the driver was laughing his butt off. When he was finished, he said, "That was the best thing I've ever been a part of on the job." He ended up discounting the tow by a bit, saying, "That's to make up for you having to be married to that entitled broad." I sold my SUV within a week, and I took over payments for his ex's car. Their divorce was no longer amicable. We got married, had a kid, and lived happily ever after. Moral of the story, pay for your own crap and don't no-show if you've been summoned to court, even if you think the plaintiff doesn't have a snowball's chance in heck of winning. Rather, especially if the plaintiff doesn't have a snowball's chance in heck of winning. In short, my husband supported his previous wife who didn't work for the first 5 years of their relationship. When they divorced, it was written in that he would continue paying the lease on her vehicle, basically alimony in the form of a car payment. She remarried and he continued paying the lease for a year, but when we needed extra cash and a car, her and her new husband refused to give up the car or contribute at all to the payments. They took her to court, she no-showed. We won by default and took her car from her. I'm getting a lot of comments that my husband broke a contract he had made with her to make the payments, so I want to explain the difference between a divorce decree and a contract. A divorce decree is not a contract. Contracts and agreements could be created and agreed to outside of a divorce decree, and then incorporated as an exhibit. A settlement agreement is incorporated into a divorce decree, usually by reference to it in the decree. The decree will generally state that the agreement is attached as an exhibit, or it will merely reference that the parties have reached an agreement that has been filed with and approved by the court. This situation was not a separate contract incorporated as an exhibit. This was part of the divorce decree, and divorce decrees can be and frequently are altered if and when the marital or financial status of either party changes significantly. Additionally, the decree stated in multiple places that changes in marital or financial status of either party is just cause to request a review by the court, with the potential of altering the decree. So basically, you can't rely or make major life decisions based on the expectation of receiving alimony. If your ex loses his job, you can legally lose your alimony. Don't no-show if you've been summoned to court. This may as well be a commandment of our channel by now. I can get her maybe being a bit overconfident about her chances, but if so, why didn't she show up to take her easy victory? Was she just so confident that she had called her ex-husband's bluff that he wouldn't bother showing up either? Or was she just completely ignorant about civil court procedures? It's a shame that what seems to have been like an amicable divorce built on a solid understanding and friendship had to go this way because of greed. It sounds like their marriage had laid the foundation for Dee to go to college in the manner of her choosing, and like she had a fairly well-off husband who could probably have finished off the lease. And it also sounds like the husband and our author were open to some sort of compromise. But no, Dee and her man pushed for maximum winnings, which sadly meant that there could be no more respect in this relationship. It's a bit sad, really. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, linked below. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. Am I the jerk for embarrassing my brother in front of the whole family? I'm married to a wonderful woman. When we first got married 8 years ago, I was making about $36K, and she was making about $230K. Fast forward a year, and we welcomed a sweet baby girl. After her maternity leave was up, I took my vacation to stay with my baby. Well, I found out that being a dad and taking care of the house is 1,000 times better than working in a stressful office. We discussed it and I became a full-time stay-at-home dad. Fast forward another 7 years and I like my lifestyle. I even enjoy keeping the house clean, cooking, taking care of the kids, who by now are 7, 4, and 1, and being involved in the mum groups, Little League, and other things. The only person who seems to have a problem with things is my older brother, 44. I don't know how, but despite being raised by parents who are very much champions of equal rights, he grew up to be the embodiment of man provide and guides, woman makes home and follows. Which is why he's a 2-time divorcee who has a terrible relationship with his kids. For the past 7 years, he's been making jokes about me, trying to imply that I'm less of a man because my wife earns money while I play little wife. I ignore him if I'm in the mood to, or just shake my head at him. Well, my wife and I were drunk one time and we came up with a bit of a naughty solution. He gives major vibes of being a prude and is casually homophobic to boot. So, when he made a joke last Sunday along the lines of, "If you were married to a man, you'd 100% be the bottom," I hit him with, "Funny you say that, I am a bottom. She really knows how to use a strap-on to make a man see the stars." He turned so red, everyone kind of let out a shocked laugh, and he finally shut up. After a while, he said he didn't want to hear about what I do with my wife in the bedroom, and I said that if he keeps his comments to himself, I'd have no reason to share. But today my mum called me to say that he refuses to attend Sunday dinner if I'm there unless I apologize. I refused to, and my mum is the one feeling bad. So, am I the jerk? Hey, your mum laughed at the joke by the sounds of things and probably realizes that your brother is kind of an idiot. I'm sure any parent feels sad when their kids hate each other, but it sounds like you patiently bore this man's crappy jokes for a long time and then responded once. And responded in a way that wasn't even a personal attack to this one guy. If your mother has to spell out her problem, it would probably be, your brother doesn't want to come because he's unable to deal with mature topics. Although the one point of difference I'll say you and I have, author, is that I'm not sure I could ever look my family in the eye again after referencing my bedroom life like that. But more power to you, and good on you for being the world's best stay-at-home dad. Screw the haters. Sounds like you guys make enough and you're happy with the arrangement. Who cares what that idiot thinks? Manager told me I was fired as a joke, so I quit. I worked for a car dealership as a lot porter. I'd gotten into an accident that totaled my car right as I was purchasing a house, which led to a predicament because you don't want to buy a new car while buying a house. Shortly after buying said house, I found a different job in a field I love. So, I put in my 2 weeks' notice, and then I went and bought from a different dealership because my wife wanted a specific car that my dealership didn't sell. I also knew how slimy the one I worked for was. A few days after the purchase of both house and car, one of the sales managers asked me if I was ready to buy a car from him. I didn't disclose the fact to anyone that I bought from a different dealer already. I informed him that I'd already bought one, so he looks at me in the most serious face and asks if I wanted to pack my things, basically because I wasn't loyal to this dealership. Knowing I already had a better job that was able to start me immediately, I said, sure, and turned and walked away to pack my things. He then realized I wasn't going to put up a fight, so he immediately started laughing and told me he was joking, and how they'd never fire anyone for going somewhere else, but I already knew a few people that had gotten fired for that exact reason. I told him I don't appreciate being fired as a joke, because first, I do have a 1.5-year-old, and if I didn't have a job lined up, he could have seriously hurt me financially. But I ended up leaving feeling relieved because this wasn't a good job. The funny thing is, he called me about 30 to 45 minutes later after I left because I had left keys to multiple brand new trucks in my desk that had to have the plastic removed and get parked. Turns out, since he fired me, they made him take care of that crap. I'm now fully enjoying my new job with the best bosses I've ever had. I know I probably took it too far, but I don't regret it. There were a good few sales managers that really cared in that job, and I don't want to throw them under the bus. But the job got too tiring because of the bad ones. Well, what can we say here? Bluff effectively called, and some revenge exacted upon your crappy manager. I love that what was initially a power play for him ended with him having to do your job as well. There's really nothing like the few weeks of a job security between two positions, is there? You can do whatever the frick you want, and if your current job fires you, then you're fine. You can even take a nice couple of days off. Sure, you might have missed out on a few bucks, but sounds worth it to me. One thing the narrator is unwilling to test the law on, though, is whether you can really just walk out of the workplace the moment someone even jokingly implies that you're sacked. Because your manager clarified that he was joking, and yet it seems like your workplace treated this as a sacred verbal contract that there was no takebacks on. In a different job, could you get severance or unemployment from this sort of firing? Feel free to explain in the comments, because I don't know how to use Google. Force an atheist to read prayer? No problem. Years ago, I went to a Catholic high school. I was also an atheist. Not an in-your-face D-bag atheist, I just didn't believe in God and I wasn't going to lie about it. They offered a solid education, it's part of the curriculum, and I had a lot of Catholic friends, so I'm obviously not going to be a jerk about it. I had no issue showing up at Mass and being respectful, taking 4 years of religion courses or doing community service. But that didn't mean that I wanted to lead prayer. I didn't mind saying a few words, but reading from the Bible never sat well with me and felt disingenuous. Luckily, most teachers were awesome and I could respectfully opt out. But at least once a year, some teacher would absolutely insist that I get up and read from one of the many beautiful passages you should know by now. Okay, I would walk to the front, say the traditional greeting, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then I would read 2 Kings 2:23-34. From there, Elisha went up to Bethel. As he was walking along the road, some boys came out of the town and jeered at him. "Get out of here, Baldy," they said. "Get out of here, Baldy." He turned around, looked at them, and called down a curse on them in the name of the Lord. Then 2 bears came out of the woods and mauled 42 of the boys. For the times where I didn't feel like going with 42 children being brutally mauled by bears for making fun of a bald guy, there was another passage that was somehow often a more appropriate read. Deuteronomy 25:11-12. If two men are fighting and the wife of one of them comes to rescue her husband from his assailant, and she reaches out and seizes him by his private parts, you shall cut off her hand. Show her no mercy. And then I'd finish up with the sign of the cross and head back to my seat. And what do you know, my turn to say prayer never seemed to come around again. You know what? I know that there are parts of the Bible that you can use to fluster certain in-your-face religious folks, or at least cause them to go into a wild, incoherent monologue about interpretations, justifications, and speculations, especially in the Deuteronomy part of the Bible, but I didn't recall those verses from Kings, and they are just truly chef's kiss. Prophet gets made fun of for being bald, casts summon woodland beings, and brings 2 brown bears into the world, gains XP, and finishes side quest. I'm not gonna lie, this sounds too much like your average murder hobo D&D session than just about anything else in the good book. And that includes the battles where 11 men take on thousands. Good find, thanks for sharing. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want to check out some great music, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.